Hi, my name is Vic Cross, and behind me on the screen you can see the web interface for IBM Cloud Infrastructure Center, also sometimes known as ICIC. ICIC is a tool that can be used for provisioning infrastructure as a service on IBM Z and IBM LinuxONE. It can manage virtual machines in ZVM, in KVM instances, or in LPAR. And it's got a great web interface, also provides OpenStack compatible APIs, so it's a really flexible tool that brings a lot greater level of usability to provisioning virtual machines on those environments that I mentioned. But the industry is moving towards infrastructure as code, right? We want to manage our environments programmatically. And one of the leading tools in that area is Terraform from Hashicorp. And we can actually use Terraform using those OpenStack compatible APIs that ICIC presents. We can use Terraform to build infrastructure as code on our IBM Z and IBM LinuxONE platforms. And that's what this video is going to show you. So let's have a look at what we've got. I have a ZVM installation in a 2-member SSI. That's not important for the actual demonstration. I'm not using SSI in this. But we're going to use a Hashicorp tool called Packer, which is going to interface with ICIC using those OpenStack compatible APIs. And Packer is going to create a couple of virtual machines from an existing image that is managed by ICIC. And once ICIC has provisioned these two virtual machines, we're going to run some Ansible, that is, Packer is going to run some Ansible automatically to customize those two images. One is going to customize as a HTTPD server, and the other is HA proxy. And once that's done, ICIC is going to create images of those two customized images. So the second phase is where we actually use Terraform. We take those existing images, those images that we just created using Packer, and we deploy infrastructure as code using Terraform. So again, OpenStack compatible APIs talking to ICIC, and ICIC is going to deploy some virtual machines for us. Like I said, based on those images that Packer just created. I'm going to create 3 Apache servers and an HA proxy that sits out the front. And again, some subsequent customization of those images can be done using Ansible, and I'm going to demonstrate that as well. So that's the demo, that's the environment, and let's get into it. So this is my ICIC system. This is the main interface for it. The 2 ZVM systems that I'm managing in this environment are there on the web page. And again, that's not important for the details of this. I just have 2 ZVM systems in SSI. Some existing virtual machines that are already deployed, and some images that are also managed by this. And this one particular image here is the one that is going to be the base image that we're going to use with Packer to create our customized images for this demo. So we'll come back to these screens as we progress through this demo. So I'm just going to push that ICIC page to the side for a moment. Eventually, there it is. Okay. So in our terminal window, I'm just going to log on to the system that has the Terraform and Packer binaries, and also all of the configuration files that will be driving the demo. And if I can just get the directory right, we'll see that there's a couple of directories in here. There's an environment file which sets some environment for me, so I'm going to source that first, and then I'm going to show you the Packer configuration first. So Packer's job is, as I said earlier, to create the images that we're going to use. So the first part of the configuration is to set up the plugins that are going to be used. We're going to use the OpenStack plugin and the Ansible plugin here in this Packer configuration. We can manage version control, and I'll touch on this in a little bit. When we create these images, we can have some kind of version control. And what I'm doing here is I'm just creating a timestamp variable, and then I'm going to include that timestamp into the name of the image that gets created, and one for HTTPD and one for HA proxy. The OpenStack provider is what Packer is going to use to actually, like I said, work with ICIC. So we do some basic setup for that OpenStack provider, and we'll include that configuration later on. So then we actually get into the build phase. Now, when I built the original base image, I forgot to include Python, and Ansible won't work without Python installed in the system. So the first thing I have to do is, outside of Ansible, run a provisioner to actually set up the base Python so that we can do the later stuff with Ansible. So the Ansible part is actually what's highlighted on the screen here. So this is using the Ansible provisioner to call out a particular playbook that is going to do the customization that I need to, and I'll show you that in a little bit of detail. So the next part is an environment variable that I have to use to pass through to the Ansible run which playbook I'm actually going to use. And again, I'll show you that how that actually gets used a little bit later. So that's setting up the Ansible provisioner to be able to run and do the customization of those basic images to customize them for the purpose that we want. And then finally, we have two stanzas that include that basic provisioner source definition that we had at the top. One to perform the HTTPD build and produce the image that we use for HTTPD, and the other is to build an image that is HA proxy, and we'll use that for our HA proxy system. So that's the Packer configuration file. If you're not really familiar with Packer, which I certainly wasn't before I came into this, then that's fine. There's plenty of reference material on the internet for how to drive Packer and how to get clarity on that. One of the other things that we need to do is define all of those variables that were specified in that basic source definition. And the one key thing here is the name of the image. So we've got a variable that defines the base image that we're going to use, that Packer is going to use to create the new images, and that's specified. So you can see the correlation here between the name that's in the Packer configuration file and the name of the image that's in ICIC. Some other variables here as well. Sometimes there's a bit of a terminology difference. I'm not sure whether it's an OpenStack thing or an ICIC thing specifically, but when Packer is referring to an availability zone, that's referring to the system groups that are defined in ICIC. So the default group in ICIC is just all of the systems that are being managed by this ICIC system. So a couple of other settings, we're customizing the type of virtual machine that we're going to create and so forth. And just to be able to show that everything's above board, so to speak, we can see here that the URL for the OpenStack API that Packer is targeting is the same URL as I'm accessing in the browser window to reach ICIC. So everything's above board, and no curtains to hide behind or anything like that. A bunch of other variables that I'm setting here to customize the environment. The last thing that I wanted to point out is that this seems to be something about the OpenStack provisioner in Packer and Terraform, is that we have to specify the name of the network that our images are going to connect to, but we have to do that using the UUID. Right? We can't actually specify the name of the network. Where did I get that UUID from? Well, I got it from the ICIC web interface. So there in ICIC, I looked up the name of the network, and I can see the UUID, so that's the value that I have to specify in the Packer configuration. So that's setting up the Packer environment. Now, a couple of other things that we're going to look at. That's right, we're going to look at the Ansible playbook, and this is what I mentioned earlier about that environment variable that I have to set. So I'm passing through into the Ansible playbook just to make it easier at the high level. I'm calling out a single playbook, but then that playbook includes a task file depending on whether we're building the HTTPD image or whether we're building the HA proxy image. And Ansible can make that choice based on that environment variable that I pass through from Packer. And just to show you exactly what's happening in each of these task files, this is the one for HA proxy. The first thing I do is run a DNF module to install HA proxy. Then I'm going to provide a customized configuration file for HA proxy. Now, it's really just the standard HA proxy configuration file, except I've added this section at the bottom that will activate the web interface for statistics, and we'll use that to be able to show what's happening as the demo runs through. So that's the only configuration change really that I've made to what is the standard HA proxy configuration file shipped with RHEL. Then standard things, we open up the firewall port for the web interface for the statistics that I just mentioned, and turn on the ability for HA proxy to be able to connect to things, and then finally configure HA proxy on this instance to be automatically started when the virtual machine starts up. So all pretty standard. Yep, firewall port, connectivity, and then HA proxy is started. So looking now at the HTTPD task file for Ansible, it's going to be very, very much the same. Installing Apache, and the web app that I'm demoing is basically based on PHP, and well, it's not much of a web app, to be honest. It's just a very, very small PHP file that just runs the PHP info function, and that'll let us see that everything's working. We open up the firewall port to allow connection, and then we run Apache, or we set up Apache, but for the purposes of demo, right, I'm getting a little creative. I'm actually setting up Apache so that it's stopped when the system starts, if I've said that right. So that Apache doesn't start up automatically, and that then gives me something that I can do when I provision using Terraform. When I provision these instances, I can, I've got to issue some sort of command, and I'm going to be using Ansible to actually start up the web server after the guest has been provisioned. Right. You would not do this normally. You would normally, if you were building for real, you'd have that started just like we built the HA proxy instance to be automatically started. So if this was a fresh, never run before environment, the first thing we would do is run a command called packer init, and that would have Packer look at the configuration file and basically check those sections at the beginning that listed the components that would be used, and if those components weren't already present, Packer would go and fetch them and set them up. So we would do that if this was a brand new configuration. Because I've run this previously, we're just going to go straight to the packer build command. And packer build is going to look at that configuration, and it's going to recognize that there's two different builds that have to be done. And it actually shows us the output for those builds in separate colors so that we can track what's going on. Now, straight away, over in our ICIC window, we can see that virtual machines are being provisioned. So Packer has recognized, well, I need to create, using the base image that I've been told, I need to use OpenStack and create virtual machines to get this process going. And in our ICIC window, we can see exactly that. We can see that we've got a HA proxy, or a virtual machine with HA proxy in its name, and also a virtual machine with HTTPD in its name. So these are the virtual machines that are getting created, and once they've been created using the existing base image, Packer is going to do two things. It's going to run those Ansible playbooks that we saw earlier to customize, to do the customization. Well, the first thing it's going to do is to run the shell provisioner that I mentioned I had to do to install Python before we could do any Ansible. So that will be the first thing that it does. And then it will run the Ansible, do those customizations individually for the HTTPD and the HA proxy. And then once that's all done, it'll shut down both of the virtual machines, and ICIC will image them, and away we go. Now you may have seen, if you got bored with my voice, whatever it might be, you might have seen a red message pop up sort of behind me there. That's a aspect of my system. I don't know whether we're firing too much traffic into OpenStack, into the OpenStack compatible APIs, and maybe the system gets a little ahead of itself, but it does actually retry that, and that doesn't actually affect. We'll see as we progress that one of the images is a little ahead in its build than the other, but other than that, it's not important. So what we were showing there is the fact that the image or the virtual machine that's being created is the one is being based on that existing base image. All right, so the HTTPD one, we've got some output from the green messages. So OpenStack has replied that the basic provisioning of the virtual machine has been completed. We're just waiting for it to be started up and have its customization applied. Now we can see that in ICIC already that's happened, right? We can see that the HTTPD virtual machine, its status is active, and health is okay. So once everything is finished inside that virtual machine, our SSH connection is going to be able to happen. We'll be able to connect to that virtual machine, and there it is, right? So here's our shell provisioner running. We're installing Python, and then once that's done, we move on to the Ansible provisioner, to the Ansible provider, and we run that playbook using Ansible, and that's completed now. So we can now see the message at the bottom there, stopping server. So Packer realizes everything that it needs to do to customize that virtual machine has now been done, so we can shut it down and then tell ICIC to make an image. And sure enough, in our ICIC window, we can see that virtual machine is now shut off. And in a short while, we'll jump across to the images tab, and we'll be able to see that in ICIC, an image is being created from that. And here it is. So we can see here is our image that is being queued in ICIC for creation. And so ICIC is connecting to the disk, taking a dump of the image of the virtual machine's disk and creating an image from it. A bunch of blue messages coming out now. So the other one's caught up. It's recovered from that transit error that we had before. We've now installed Python. We've run the configuration, the Ansible configuration playbook to install HA proxy, and that's now completed. So again, same status message, just this time in blue. We're stopping the virtual machine and then creating the image. Right. So over in our ICIC, we can see that both of those are shut off, and we've got the second queued image now. So both of those are actually being imaged now by ICIC, and shortly everything will be set to go. Takes a little while sometimes, disk can take a little while to do things. These are not tiny images. These are probably several gigabytes in size, so there's a bit of data that has to be pushed around, and it takes a little while. But if we think for a second about what we're actually doing, my fingers haven't touched a keyboard this whole time, other than moving the mouse around and clicking on things, right? But my fingers haven't touched the keyboard. If we were doing this in the old days, when we were originally doing guest image cloning and things like that, we'd be running scripts, we'd be having to manually mount file systems and connect to them and customize, change IP addresses and things like that, and we haven't had to do any of those things. So yeah, okay, it's taking a few minutes, but it's happening automatically, it's happening programmatically, which is a pretty cool thing. So right on cue, the HTTPD image has finished imaging, and we've got the green message there that says that that guest is now, well, the message says it's terminating, but what's actually happening is that we realize we don't need the virtual machine anymore. So having shut it down, we can actually tell ICIC to delete it. We don't need that source virtual machine anymore. So that's actually what's happening. It's already shut down. We're cleaning up after ourselves at this point. And after a little while, we'll get the same for the HA proxy one. So yeah, back on the virtual machine screen here, we can see that the HTTPD one is actually gone. It's not there anymore. And yeah, after a little while, the HA proxy one will catch up. So getting there. It took 7 minutes and a few seconds to do the first one, the HTTPD image, and the HA proxy one is only just a little bit behind. In fact, it's cleaning up now. So for what's happening in the background and the fact that we haven't had to touch a keyboard the whole time, that's pretty slick. So again, this is creating the basic images that we can use, customized basic images, one again containing HTTPD and a web application, and the other is containing HA proxy. So that's the first part of the demo. You can see that final virtual machine has been cleaned up now. And if we jump back to the images, here's our new images. We've got a couple from previous, but the new ones that we've just created have the new timestamp, and they're based on that original basic image. So yeah, as I mentioned, that's the first part of the demo, where we've created the base images, and we'll be able to move on to using those new basic images and customizing them, instantiating them, customizing them with Terraform, now that we've built the basic images. So that's it for this video. Come back for the second half, where we'll go through that Terraform stage that I just mentioned.